Attend the lunch that Minister Ong is shortly to host. Mat Sabu first.
So many questions for me. Which is good. For the terrorists, there is no religious border. But whether the Muslim or non-Muslim, in New Zealand, Sri Lanka, and all the worship place, as a masjid, church, is in Iskandaria in Egypt. So we understand that terrorists is no border and no ideology, certain ideology, and no religion. So we have to fight with them in soft way and hard way. But I am a very appreciate and the role the Prime Minister of New Zealand, how she faced with the incident in New Zealand. We appreciate him. That's the way the world leaders should behave when that thing happen in their country. So I salute the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And we also have to study deep inside these terrorists, who's their father and mother. Because they have a lot of money. They have a very sophisticated weapon. If they're an NGO, I think they cannot afford to have that modern weapon. And now in Idlib, because they have even a rocket launcher. So who's their father and mother? We must, our intelligence must share and expose who their mother and father. Then we can reduce their activity throughout the world. Then we know China is a border with us. China is near to us. So the changing of the policy will affect us. That's why I know, sometimes they send a Coast Guard. The Coast Guard, the China Coast Guard is bigger than Malaysia warship. So how can we going to chase them? So we cannot fight with them, but we will always talk to them, defend diplomacy, respect sovereignty, and if they send a warship there, then America also will challenge them. So when the elephant fight, the grass will suffer. When elephant laugh, the grass will suffer. That's mentioned by Prime Minister Lee last night.
Relations between Malaysia and China. As we meet this morning, Prime Minister Datuk Seri Najib will be with his counterpart, Premier Lee Keqiang, to celebrate 40 years of diplomatic relations between Malaysia and China, which was started off by Datuk Seri Najib's father 40 years ago. The point to be made about that is now we have two generations of leaders from Malaysia that has worked closely with China. 31st of May, 40 years ago, I'm sure they had a lot of challenges, but it required a lot of courage for the late Tun Abdul Razak to make the decision to travel to China and navigate those waters. And if he did not, we probably would not be able to see his son there celebrating 40 years of relations with China. Secondly, if there is any lessons to be learned from history, positive lessons to be learned, it is about interaction, engagement, exactly what we are doing today. And that's why I find the Shangri-La dialogue so important. And that is why I decided to abandon my Prime Minister this morning to come to Singapore. And John, if I don't have a job next week, I will be applying for one with the IISS. It is a very complex journey that we're going on board. But let me answer how difficult it has been and how easy it has been if we look at it in the right perspective. I'm so happy that General Fung just walked into the hall from Vietnam. And in the early stages of our search for MH370. I called him for permission to allow Chinese vessels to search for MH370 in Vietnamese waters. He told me that he had just one sleepless night, and bearing in mind relations between Vietnam and Malaysia and ASEAN solidarity and my own personal relationship with him, he allowed it. We saw 61 sorties of aeroplanes of all sorts flying over the airspace of Indonesia in 2 days to get to Perth. We had P3 Orions, P8 Poseidons. We had the Chinese Illusion parked next to each other in Perth. We had the Chinese vessel Zulong. We had the Ocean Shield. And I remember quite vividly when Secretary Hammond called me early one morning when I was in Hawaii, still in my bathrobe, to tell me that HMS Tyrus, a nuclear submarine for the UK, is on its way to the Southern Ocean. Far cry from what we have been debating in the last few weeks. Far cry from what we have seen in the streets of Hanoi. So answering the question that was posed earlier, it depends on us, on whether we want to look at relations positively, or are we going to pursue and navigate the waters in a negative approach. Malaysia and ASEAN and the ASEAN way has never been to the letter. And this is where my speech today was a lot of focus, because it's not lessons that Malaysia can teach Philippines or Malaysia can teach Vietnam, because we cannot deal with major powers alone. But 10 nations of ASEAN with shared common principles, which Chuck Hagel mentioned just now, to find bridges that can build, we have a better chance of having stability in this region. And that, I think, is key. And the way forward is to build communications between all the stakeholders in this region, if to avoid what Secretary Hammond mentioned just now, miscalculation, unintended conflict, and we should all bear in mind that the First World War, which we are going to celebrate the end of next year, was started by sheer accident. That we must avoid for our region as the world focuses in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.